Hi everybody, Mario Francisco Robles, MFR here with you, and this is why Justice League won't crack a billion. I'm going to start by giving you the top 3 reasons why this will be the case, and I'll wrap things up by explaining to you why the billion figure is important to begin with, and why we should even be worried about it. Alright, so that is coming up at the end, but first, your top 3 reasons. Reason number 1, Zack Snyder. Now look, I'm not about to go off on an anti-Zack Snyder rant. That's not what the purpose of this video is. What I'm about to point out is really just sort of facts. It's facts about him, his filmmaking style, who he appeals to, and what this means for Justice League. I'd like to refer to a quote by Mr. Mark Twain. All right? Mark Twain once said, "My books are like water. Those of the great geniuses are wine. Fortunately, everybody drinks water." Now, how does that come into play here? Well, Mr. Twain is essentially pointing out the fact that the stuff that he wrote had mass appeal. It was very sort of pop-friendly stuff. Didn't matter if you were a kid, didn't matter if you were a grown-up, didn't matter if you were black or white or anything. You could read Mark Twain's stories and enjoy them. And everyone and anyone could enjoy them. Whereas there were other writers who were trying to do things that were a little more like wine, things that were a little more niche. So when you even within the wine connoisseur community, there are subdivisions. So there's not even universal love of wine. Within wine community, for lack of a better term, some will like red, some will like white, some will like it dry, some will like it wet, some like it sweet, some like it bitter. There's all kinds of wine fans. So Twain's point was he was the type of writer who created water. It was easy to digest. Everyone enjoyed it. It's not exactly genius. It's not the most incredible writing or thought-provoking stories you'll ever read, but you'll enjoy it. You'll have a nice time. Zack Snyder is not that kind of a filmmaker. If we're going to sort of move that metaphor over to filmmaking, he likes to make wine. He likes to make films that are a little more challenging, films that appeal to certain kind of people who enjoy his particular style. He's not someone who's ever had one of those huge, wide, mainstream successes. If you look at his track record, if you look at Dawn of the Dead, 300, Watchmen, Sucker Punch, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, there's always been a sort of divisive quality to them. Where, yes, the people who love them really love them, but a lot of people are not necessarily sold on them. And that's just kind of how he is. He's not one of these, and even box office-wise, I should note, since we're discussing Justice League's box office projections. Even just in terms of box office, he's never had a film that was a huge runaway box office success. And the one film that you would think would have guaranteed that, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, even that one sort of stalled out at a very unfortunate figure. But we'll get to that during one of the later points. The point here when it comes to Zack Snyder is that's just not his style. He doesn't make the kind of crowd-pleasing, cross-generational, intercultural, everyone loves it type of films that are prone to have that kind of success. You know, if you look at other directors, even if you question whether or not they're all that good, you look at your J.J. Abramses, you look at your Joss Whedons, you look at your Steven Spielbergs, you look at even James Wan. You know, they know how to make films that appeal to a very wide swath of people. That's why if you look at a lot of the films that have crossed that billion-dollar mark, they're films that we call the 4-quadrant movie. In Hollywood, the 4-quadrant movie means males 25 and under, males 25 and up, females 25 and under, females 25 and up. In other words, everyone. Certain movies only shoot for certain quadrants. You know, oh, this is mainly going to be an action movie. It's going to be a hard R, and it's going to be aimed towards men. This is going to be a romantic comedy, and we're going to feature, 2 actors in their 40s and 50s, and this will be for older women. You know, certain movies target certain demographics, but other movies want to be that 4-quadrant movie where everyone can see it, kind of like Star Wars: The Force Awakens, for example. A perfect example of it doesn't matter where you come from, how old you are, what level of Star Wars fandom you have, you can see that movie and have a nice time at the theater and then go let someone know, oh yeah, I enjoyed that, you should go see that. That's not Zack Snyder's thing. And yesterday, Superman himself, Henry Cavill, even admitted as such. He acknowledged that. In an interview, he just said that it's a niche style of movie within a genre. It reflects in the audience reviews and critics' reviews. It's divisive. When anything is niche, is going to be liked by some and disliked by others. That's the whole point of niche. That's what Henry Cavill said. So even Superman acknowledges that Batman v Superman and Snyder's vision in general is more of a niche thing. And that's what we're talking about here. So that's why reason number one, that Justice League is destined to not cross that Bollywood figure of $1 billion, is Mr. Snyder himself. Number two is track record. Now, as I said, track record here is not rosy. Okay, if we're the biggest sort of indicator of what this film is going to do in terms of its track record is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Because if you think about it, that film already did a lot of what Justice League hopes to do, right? It's going to give everyone their first real chances to see Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, the DC Holy Trinity on the screen, on the big screen together, fighting a bad guy. Batman v Superman already did that. In fact, even beyond that, it also introduced us to the Flash. It introduced us to Aquaman. It introduced us to Cyborg. It gave us an all-new Lex Luthor. It brought in Doomsday. It also, this was the first time, mind you, anyone had ever seen Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. So it had all these monumental firsts, and it rang all these different pop culture bells, and it still didn't cross the $1 billion mark. That speaks volumes to the amount of mass audience members who were sort of turned away by Batman v Superman, be it from the so-so word of mouth from fans, be it from the terrible reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, be it just from what they saw in the trailers. People, for whatever reason, rejected this movie. And now, and let's talk about that a little bit, because there's a misconception that since it made $873 million, this should be seen as a great box office success. In actuality, it's not. In doing research for this piece, I looked up exactly how much profit, which is really where it counts, how much profit Warner Brothers made on Batman v Superman. That film only made the studio $105.7 million bucks. Sorry, 105.7. I'm sorry, I just can't believe that, because the film cost reportedly $250 million to make, though the rumors have always suggested that it was actually even more than that. But even if it weren't, even if it really was $250 million, $105.7 million bucks is nothing to write home about. And that is why Warner Brothers has been working so hard ever since then to try to right the ship, because that is a huge problem. All right, just to sort of put into perspective for you, the last two solo Batman movies made more than that. And this one had Batman. This one had, I don't need to run down the list of all the amazing things Batman v Superman had in it that should have, in theory, broken the box office. Instead, it puttered out. And just to really sort of put into perspective how sad that 873 million figure is, this year, Spider-Man Homecoming, which is the second reboot of Spider-Man in 5 years, covering fairly well-trod path. People have seen a ton of Spider-Man movies by now. People have seen Iron Man every other year for the last 9 years. There's nothing all that fresh or exciting about Spider-Man Homecoming. That movie made more than Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. All right? So, just based on track record alone, based on the fact that even the title, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, it was signaling to audiences everywhere, Dawn of Justice. This is going to bring us to Justice League. In theory, that should have sounded the alarm in people who've grown up on the Super Friends, people who grew up on comic books and the world's finest and getting to see Batman and Superman on the screen together, people who bought the Dark Knight Returns book. Everyone should have come running out in droves to come see this movie, and they didn't. So that's very, very telling. It's telling what sort of impact Snyder's style has had on these movies and how sort of off-putting mass audiences have found what he's created thus far. So that's kind of, it's reasons 1 and 2 sort of lumped in together now at this point. Zack Snyder had an impact on things. Whether or not you love him or hate him, that's not what we're here to discuss. But you cannot disagree with the fact that he's never really made something that mass audiences eat up and turn up in droves for and then come see in theaters over and over again. And then, like I said, the track record. If Batman v Superman couldn't do it, there's little to no reason to think that Justice League will. The third reason that Justice League won't crack $1 billion is the crowded marketplace it's going to be released into. Right now, Thor Ragnarok, the latest Marvel Studios film, I believe the 17th entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is out and it's overperforming like crazy. Every time box office figures come in, it's higher than anyone could have projected. No one really expected a third Thor movie to do this well. I mean, the first 2 were not reviewed terribly well, and Thor the Dark World especially was a black eye and probably the worst movie in the MCU by many metrics. So no one really expected Thor 3, Thor Ragnarok, to suddenly come out and be this huge monolith that it's becoming. This past weekend, it overshot its estimates. It looks like it's going to have another very strong second weekend. It's doing great weekday numbers, even on days when people have work and school the next day. This thing is making $11 million a night. The film is doing increasingly well, and why is that? It's doing that because the word of mouth is extremely positive. And how does that factor in here? Well, word of mouth is how you get those casual people in to come see the movie. Because look, all us hardcore fanboy types, we're going to see these no matter what. I'm seeing Justice League no matter what the reviews say. I was going to see Thor 3 even though I kind of hated Thor the Dark World and I've been kind of tired of the MCU formula. I was still going to see it because, it's Thor. But the word of mouth is what brings in those casual people who don't really follow these kinds of movies, but will make their way to the theater when they hear enough great things. And Thor Ragnarok's ad campaign also has a very sort of uplifting energy to it. It looks like it's just going to be a good, fun time at the theater. It has that kind of WTF factor of what? Hulk versus Thor. It has all these little things that are going to make people who are more casual cinema goers say, you know what? I want to be entertained. I keep hearing from everyone that this movie's great. I'm going to go plop down my money and go check out this Thor Ragnarok movie. And that's one of the reasons it's performing so well, because it is appealing to a broad audience. It's pulling in people who aren't typically comic book movie cinema goers. It's the same thing that Wonder Woman had going for it earlier this year. One of the reasons that the projections for Wonder Woman were so low and it was so hard for people to get a grip on how well or how poorly it was going to do was because no one knew how to quantify this film's audience. Was it going to be just hardcore DC fans? Was it going to be a little wider and it doesn't matter if you're DC or Marvel or what, just general superhero fans? Or will it appeal to wide mass audiences? Will it activate a segment of the demographic that no one saw coming? And Wonder Woman did that because it had that monumental feel about it where you had all kinds of people showing up because regardless of what came before or after, they've grown up on Wonder Woman. They know that this is her first movie, that this is the first real female superhero movie in the modern era. We're not going to count Supergirl from the 80s. So it had this big sort of cross-generational, appeal where people who Hollywood didn't know if they could count on suddenly showed up. Those are those casuals I'm talking about. Those are those people who don't typically show up to these movies, but they do because they've heard enough good things and because there's something about the characters that appeals to them. Right now, Justice League was hoping to pull some of that in. Justice League, in order to crack that billion, in order to be more of a 4-quadrant movie, they wanted to appeal to the casuals, to the normies. That's why so many of the trailers have had more humor and have been so much lighter and more sort of broad in scope. than some of the trailers we used to see for Batman v Superman and stuff like that. They're trying their best to get those casual moviegoers to go, hey, I want to check out this Justice League movie. This seems like a novel idea. But now Thor Ragnarok is starting to appeal to those people, and no one saw that coming. So for folks who don't get out to the movies that often, they're already seeing Thor Ragnarok this week. If we think that they're going to go back again and make a second exception for a comic book movie next week, I think you're going to be sadly disappointed by the turnout of the casuals. You know, we know the hardcores are going to be there no matter what. But the folks who rarely get to the theater and are now going to check out Ragnarok because of how novel the whole thing is and all the positive buzz around it, in all likelihood, they're not going to make it out to see Justice League unless the buzz is also incredible. And I guess we're going to see how that part plays out. But Thor Ragnarok is eating up a lot of the casual sort of normie audience in terms of people who wouldn't normally see these films. And then a week later, after Justice League comes out, is the Disney Pixar film Coco. Now, I know you're wondering, why would this be an issue? Well, here's why. One of the other bits of audiences that you would ideally think would show up for Justice League are families. Remember, these are comic book characters. These are cartoons. You have all these kids who grow up watching Teen Titans on the Cartoon Network, who grow up playing with Batman and Superman action figures, and little girls who want to be Wonder Woman and all this sort of stuff. So the family audience is very, very important. Very important to the success, to the four-quadrant appeal of this movie. Coco comes out 5 days later. It comes out on November 22nd. And we know Disney Pixar's track record. Family audiences show up to those films in droves. They make insane amounts of money. Their movies almost always cross that $1 billion mark because they have a huge appeal. And guess what? Coco has even another little kind of hidden secret weapon up its sleeve. Remember that little phenomenon from a couple years ago known as Frozen? Well, Coco has an animated short before it that's a Frozen short with 4 original songs, new songs for Frozen fanatics all over the place. So kids, as soon as they start really pushing that, and they put it on the posters and they started emphasizing it in commercials, and kids are going to get to see Frozen again and Olaf and all that sort of stuff, Coco is going to do insane numbers, even if just for Frozen itself. And the early buzz on the film itself is that it's another Pixar masterpiece. It's another great Disney Pixar film with cross-generational appeal, a deep, thoughtful, heartfelt story to tell. So Coco is going to have this huge buzz around it. Justice League, who knows what sort of buzz it'll have around it. But the point is, 5 days after Justice League comes out, family audiences around Thanksgiving and onward, when they're thinking of, all right, let's take the kids out to the movies, and they look at what's out, there's going to be all this positive buzz and noise around Coco, and they're going to have to choose between that and Justice League. And if they saw Batman v Superman, or if they know sort of Zack Snyder's typical track record, they're going to go for Coco. So the thing so just to sort of distill all this for you, leading up to Justice League, Thor Ragnarok is eating up a lot of the casuals. Coming up right after Justice League, literally 5 days after Justice League, is Coco, which is going to eat up all of the family audiences. Then a few weeks later, once Coco is chilled a little bit, Star Wars The Last Jedi comes out. I'm not too worried about Last Jedi, by the way, because it does come out a full month after Justice League. And truthfully, most of these movies make the bulk of their money in those first 3 to 4 weeks. So really, Last Jedi shouldn't have too much of a dent, but it's just indicative of the marketplace that this movie is entering. It's really going to be relying very heavily on that first weekend. And it's really going to be relying heavily on trying to get as many people beyond the hardcore as possible into the theater on that first weekend, because it's going to be harder and harder to get the casuals into the theater as the days wear on, with films like Coco and other, there's a whole bunch of movies coming out, mind you. I'm just focusing on the ones that I see siphoning off the bulk of the audience. that Warner Brothers and DC Entertainment likely would like to have for Justice League. The audience members that would push this thing up past $1 billion. And why does it even matter? Why does the $1 billion figure even matter? Well, because it's become just what's expected of these kinds of movies. For better or worse, all of the Avengers type films have made over $1 billion. So they've become sort of the standard bearer. And even though we all like to talk about how there's not really a rivalry, Marvel and DC, it's not about them versus each other. It's about, all the fans winning and the entire industry wins when they do well. And that's all well and good. This is not about that. But the point I'm trying to raise here is that's just what people see these movies making. All right? Avengers 1 made $1.5 billion. Avengers 2 made $1.4 billion. Captain America Civil War, which is basically Avengers 2.5, also made $1.5 billion. So in the eyes of the industry, that's just what these kinds of momentous superhero team-up movies are supposed to make. And if Justice League, with everything that Warner Brothers has thrown into this, everything but the kitchen sink practically, if that one can't rise to the occasion and also join that same $1 billion club as the Avengers movies, it's not going to look good for the studio. And it's going to seriously make them question whether or not they want to keep investing these many resources into every movie. And that's why, honestly, it looks like they're already backpedaling on that. For anyone following all the stories that have come out in the last month and a half with fresh quotes from Jeff Johns and Diane Nelson and John Berg, moving forward, they're not doing these kinds of movies anymore. Wonder Woman is going to become the model. Instead of throwing all these characters in and all these resources and hyping it up like it's going to be this huge cinematic event, they're going to simplify it and just tell, nice, good, well-made, solo, standalone movies, which is great. I loved Wonder Woman. If you go back and watch my review, I absolutely adored that movie. For me, it's probably the second best superhero movie of 2017. Right up there with Logan for me. So Wonder Woman, will now be the template. And Aquaman's going to be the same sort of thing, where it's really going to focus on Jason Momoa's Aquaman, not really so much on the shared universe and trying to tell a larger story. Remember, originally, Justice League was going to be a two-parter. It was going to be part 1, and then part 2, and then part 2 was going to have Darkseid in it, or whatever. All that has been put on indefinite hold because Warner Brothers is now questioning whether or not we should ever, we should do this again anytime soon. So the reason that $1 billion is important is if you want to see a Justice League 2 anytime soon, if you want to see more of these team-ups, if you want to see the shared universe concept from a DC film anytime soon, you're going to be hoping and praying that Justice League joins that rarefied air in the $1 billion arena. But unfortunately, it's not going to happen. And look, if I end up wrong here and this thing surpasses all expectations and it does end up joining the $1 billion club, I will apologize. I will make an entire video just to say how wrong I was and why I was wrong and what an idiot I am. I will do that. I'm man enough to admit when I'm wrong. But I just don't see that happening in all honesty. But all right, so I hope you enjoyed this MFR rant for why Justice League won't crack $1 billion. This is the first Patreon perk I'm offering my patrons. You guys get this a few days early. Everyone else will have to wait for Justice League week to get this as part of a Justice League Blitz here at El Fanboy. So I hope you enjoyed it. Share it amongst your friends. Hopefully I brought up some things that you might not have thought about, and maybe I'm making you look at this a little bit differently. And hopefully you're not pissed at me, because this really wasn't anti-DC. This wasn't anti-Zack Snyder, any of that sort of stuff. I'm just pointing out all the things that are sort of stacked against this movie and reasons why there's very little reason to think this thing is going to cross over into the, what would that be, 10 figures? I'm bad at math. Yeah, 10 figures. All right. So if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Go to the El Fanboy Podcast on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, anywhere that premium podcasts are found, and visit www.patreon.com/elfanboy if you would like to donate to the cause and keep these kinds of things coming. Because Lord knows I got plenty more to say, and I appreciate all the support you give me. Thank you.